Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this Around the Ropes YouTube exclusive. Now, guys, WrestleMania was a couple months ago, and the headliner that got in was Paul Heyman. And you guys all know Paul Heyman from a little company in South Philly called ECW. And I have the honor and the privilege tonight of having somebody on who was a part of the ECW days. One of the senior refs, the one, the only, Jim Molineaux joins the show. Jim, how you doing this evening?
Very good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Like I said, it's an honor and a privilege to have you on with the amount of history you've been a part of.
I'm just a lucky guy that had a great seat for every match.
But before we get into your time with ECW, kind of want to dive in. What made you want to become, what made you become a pro wrestling fan in the first place?
Yeah, I just grew up watching it Saturday mornings. It was, on after cartoons Saturday morning, and then lunch, and after lunch, and my dad would come in from the garage working on his motorcycles. He raced motorcycles on the weekends, so he was usually tooling around on his bike. But he'd come in, have lunch, and he'd watch wrestling on Saturday. He did the same thing on Sunday, but Sundays we'd watch roller derby. So, but yeah, that was where it started. Being a fan, just watching. I never went to matches as a kid. But it was just something my dad, decided he wasn't going to spend money on for us, and said we'd go to the local minor league hockey team. And I'm diehard hockey fan, diehard Flyers fan, and that got me started on that too, and got away from it for a long time. Through high school, didn't really play, didn't really watch wrestling. Got married, had kids, and Hulkamania started, and started watching it again. But the real trigger that got me was the cable system that I had finally got TBS, and got to see the NWA, and then it got syndicated here, and became a huge NWA fan, and finally went to a show. The first show I went to was the Great American Bash in 1987, and I was a smart ass as a kid, and figure I had a sharp tongue. I figure I could, maybe I could do a manager thing. So, because I always wanted to entertain in some way, either whether it's in sports or acting, because I did acting in school, or music. I don't know if you can see, there's a couple of guitars hanging up on the wall there. So I just wanted to be in front of people. And I thought, well, maybe I can give this a try. So I started training as a manager. Didn't quite work out. Went the referee route, and been doing it for 35 years now.
Now, growing up, I'm assuming you had seen a lot more of like the Bruno Sammartinos, the Vern Gagne, that era of wrestlers.
Yeah, well, I think the champion when I was a kid, I might be wrong, it could have been Bruno, but I'm pretty sure it was Bob Backlund. So we had Bob Backlund. We only had the WWF. We didn't have cable TV. It was non-existent yet. So we just had the local promotion, which was the WWF. And so, we had Tito Santana, we had Dean Ho, we had Tony Garea, Stan Stasiak, just that era of guy, Gorilla Monsoon. And actually, the town I lived in, the next town over, which is a town my dad grew up in, my grandmother still lived there, Buddy Rogers lived in. So I would be in the local pharmacy going through comic books and wrestling magazines as a kid, and Buddy Rogers would walk in, and it was like, wow, that's a champ. And I mean, when he walked in, the champ walked in. He had that cock of the yard strut. He always had that. And luckily, when I started with Joel Goodhart, he used Buddy a little bit, and I got to drive Buddy around those few times he came in, because he stayed at a hotel near where he lived, and I was still in the area. So they were like, "Hey, since you're right there, can you pick Buddy up for us?" I'm like, "No, I'm too busy." Of course, I'd pick up Buddy Rogers. And got to drive him, and got very friendly with him. Very nice guy. Great, had a great time with
him. Very rarely do I have any guests on here who mention the name Buddy Rogers, and people actually know who you're talking about. Do you have any stories of being in the car with him that you'd like to share?
Well, and so this is 1989, 1990, Tri-State Wrestling Alliance, and I drove him into Philadelphia to do the morning radio show with Joel Goodhart that he had on Saturday mornings. And so we did the show, and he's, pal, let's go get some breakfast. So he knew where he wanted to go for breakfast, and went to the restaurant, or a diner. It was good old fashioned, city diner. And opened the door, and it was like 1960. Champ, how are you? Everybody knew him, and he didn't live in the area. He was living in Florida. This is in Philadelphia, and he'd been in Florida for probably a good 10 years. Champ, how are you? Come on, sit down. We got your table for you. But the whole thing, and we didn't get charged anything, and it was amazing that the guy who was 72 at the time, 71, 72 at the time, was still recognized as the champion, and he was full of class. I mean, he was great. Never any kind of issue or problem with him. He was great to everybody that was around him.
I unfortunately I've seen interviews he's done, and he seems very down to earth. But while all this is going on, there's that, because you mentioned Philly, there's that little company, Eastern Championship Wrestling, that's kind of getting started around this.
Well, it hadn't started yet, because Tri-State Wrestling shut down, and Todd Gordon, who was financially helped Tri-State Wrestling, and Larry Winters, who was one of the bookers of Tri-State, who went on to be the first booker of ECW, and Bob Ortiz and a couple other people were the ones who originally formed ECW. So had to wait for Tri-State to shut down, which was a shame, because I thought we were rolling. I didn't know that we had the money problems. That seems to be a running storyline with me. Didn't know we had the financial problems. But TWA was going to do a big show. Like, they did 4 big shows every year, 3 or 4 shows, I'm not sure, but I'll say 4. And they had one coming up, and the main event was going to be Buddy Rogers at 72 against Buddy Landell, who was the Tri-State Wrestling champion. It was the battle of the buddies. And what Joel did was, for a big show, he would use all the local TWA guys on the undercard, and he would bring in guys from who maybe just recently left the NWA, or guys from Memphis, things like that. Joel was big on pushing the Memphis guys. So we had Eddie Gilbert in. We had Jerry Lawler. We had Austin Idol. Back to the NWA, you had Jim Cornette and Stan Lane, Alan Perez, the Koloffs. So, I mean, there was a great mixture of the upper card that he would bring in. So that match and the other match, and I've told John Finnegan, the other referee at Tri-State at the time, along with Joe Zanoli, who was our referee at the time too, I would have locked them in the closet to do this tag match, because it's never happened. It never happened in the U.S., and this would have been the only place that it did happen, was the Can-Am Express of Furness and LaFon against Williams and Gordy. I would have loved to have reffed that match because I was a huge All Japan fan.
So now, I apologize about the mix-up with the dates there. So when did you first hear about ECW then, or did you hear about it when it was being called Eastern Championship, or when it became?
Oh yeah, no, I was there from day one. So when Tri-State shut down, and I called John, and he said, I think there's something going on. Hold on, and we'll find things out. And yeah, ECW, the Eastern Championship Wrestling, was born, and really kind of just moved into the slot of the TWA, doing rec centers and high schools and things like that. Didn't do any big shows, but stayed real local with those things. We ran the Philadelphia Sports Bar, which was co-owned by 3 or 4 of the big name sports guys in Philadelphia, and it was right in Center City. So we would do those too, and that's as far as we had gotten. And then there was a local TV show that was maybe you could see in like a 5 or 6 block range of this little television station in South Philadelphia, and that kind of got the buzz going for ECW to find TV, and they grow from there.
So now, they make the transition over from Eastern Championship Wrestling to Extreme Championship Wrestling. And I know Paul Heyman did a special on the network. I think it was last year, the year beforehand. And I remember he was talking about the reason why he wanted to change it was he felt that Eastern Championship Wrestling made it too regionalized, mm-hmm. and too much, that he wanted to expand it by changing it to Extreme Championship Wrestling. When the idea, when it's the name is getting changed, are you sitting there saying, okay, this isn't good? Like, did you have doubts in your head that this was going to work out, or did you think, okay, no, this is going to work out?
No, I kind of had a feeling that, or I guess maybe a hope that it would work out, because we were so successful in the Philadelphia area, and we were starting to get picked up syndication for other areas. So I mean, next was to Florida. And you really can't, even though it's on the East Coast, you really can't be called Eastern Championship Wrestling and touring Florida. And plus, I think the change to Extreme helped us because Extreme was like kind of a buzzword at the time. So, it was time to expanding. Like if we were going to end up going to Chicago and Los Angeles and Detroit or wherever, you can't be called Eastern. So it fit. It was maybe it was a necessary evil. I always say that if we had stayed small and regional, we could have been, what Ohio Valley was as a training facility for the WWE.
Now, we have Extreme Championship Wrestling. When did they officially move to Swanson Street, to what now is known as 2300?
That was early on. That was while we were still Eastern.
Okay.
Johnny Hotbody had found the building, and because he was a South Philly kid, and the building was owned by a Mummers organization. If you don't know what the Mummers is, go Google it. I hate explaining what it is because I hate the Mummers. Oops. I may have said that for the first time publicly. But he found this rehearsal building that they also did bingo in, and it was absolutely big enough for what we were needed or what would have worked for us. At the end, maybe it could have been a little bigger. If you asked the people that were there, they probably would have told you, yeah, we could have used another 30 feet in each direction to fit everybody in. But yeah, Johnny Hotbody found it. We were still Eastern. Eddie Gilbert was still the booker. So if you look at like old stuff that's on Peacock Network, I think they have the older stuff, like specialty shows. I don't know what category name they give it, but if you look at things like Ultra Clash, that was from the arena. Let's see, probably about 6 or 8 weeks worth into TV. of the, I get, what do they call it? Do they call it the hardcore TV?
Yeah, I think it's called ECW Hardcore TV or
Yeah.
something.
So I guess, probably about 8 or 10 weeks into that is probably when we switch over to the arena from Cabrini College, which is where we did our first set of tapings. I think we did 2 sets of tapings there, and we did probably 3 to 4 weeks each taping.
Now, when you were doing the tape, when you guys when the move happened to go to what's now known as the 2300 Arena. Now I have to give it the proper term, even though everybody knows it as ECW Arena.
Sure.
Were those taped shows, or were those live?
Oh, those were taped. What Eddie would do, he would come in with a legal size pad of paper and hang it up on the door with the matches and the order that they were going to be in, and they were, like I said, 3 to 4 weeks worth of TV. So, like maybe the first little match, 1, 2, 3, and it says week number 1, and then a line, and week number 2, next few matches or whatever, and that's how it was laid out, and that's what we did. It was a little different with Paul. I mean, everything was taped, nothing was live from there except for the first pay-per-view. But Paul was a little different of an approach. He had an idea of what he was doing for TV those weeks that we were taping, and so he'd have those matches written down, and then he'd look around to see who was here and go, Guido, let's see, who could Guido? Let's have Guido go against Donnie Allen, put Guido over, That's what he would fill in the blanks when he got there.
Now, obviously, people still talk about ECW. When you guys going into that first pay-per-view, which I think was barely legal, 97, if I remember correctly, did you guys think back then, okay, they're going to still be talking about us in 2024?
If we were still a running company, and I'm sure it would be a different beast than what it was, because it was always evolving, and all wrestling companies change and evolve. If ECW was still up and running, yeah, but otherwise, I thought, let's get through this one. We might do this one. This might be it for us. You never know, because when I got to the building, they everybody checked in. They said, okay, go get something to eat, go take a nap or something. I lived 15, 20 minutes. I still do live 20 minutes away from the building, and said, I'm gonna set up camp here and kind of watch what goes on and take it all in, because who knows if I'm ever going to do it again. But as far as ECW as an entity being talked about 30 years later, and being shut down for as long as that's been, as long as we have been, yeah, the only thing I can compare it to is, I always think of it musically, is that we're like, grunge rock or punk rock. We had our existence and it's kind of faded away. There's still trickles of it out there. The Pretenders are still out playing, but they're not as punky as they were. Pearl Jam just put out a new album, and they're part of the grunge scene, but how many other grunge bands are out there still putting albums out? So that's what, that's how I look at ECW. The guys are still out there. There's a handful of guys still out there working. And you get that ECW chant when you come through the curtain. So yeah, that's really what I compare it to. But I didn't think, there's no other company talked about like that.
No, and like I was telling you before we started recording, I had the opportunity to be there WrestleMania weekend, and just walking through that building, and for the 2 shows, for Battleground Championship Wrestling, and I think even for the Busted Open party, they broke out in ECW chants, and if I tell you the chills that went down my spine to just sit there and say that I got a chance to chant ECW in that building was something I never thought would ever happen to me, ever. Now, one of the more famous rivalries, and I mean, there's a laundry list of rivalries that went on in ECW, but one of the more famous ones was Taz and Sabu.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a famous picture where you see the two of them in the ring. I don't remember if it was before. I think it may have been before one of the pay-per-views.
Yeah, it was for Barely Legal. I know exactly what picture you're talking about.
And then there's a picture of you in the background.
Right in the middle of them.
Yeah, what was it like being the ref for a rivalry like those two with how much, of an impact those two had?
That was great. I mean, I'm really, I shouldn't say that I'm surprised, but I'm privileged that I was able to do something like that. That's the way I look at a lot of the matches that I did. When people say, "What are your favorites?" I look at it as, yeah, I was privileged to do it. I was lucky. That was supposed to be one of the main event. It was definitely the catalyst to launch the pay-per-view, the build-up between Sabu and Taz, two guys that had been partners and became enemies and didn't touch for 18 months or 2 years or whatever it was, and then finally they're coming together at a pay-per-view for the first time, and that when that bell rings, that's going to be an explosion. And you kind of felt that, the fans came right along the ride with us, and we're like, yeah, man, we're ready to go. We're ready to blow the roof off of this place. And it felt great. It was really a privilege to be a part of some of that stuff.
You brought up the crowd, and that's one thing a lot of wrestling fans will always say is that what made ECW was the fans. Obviously, you were literally there front and center. Do you think, looking back on it now, that the fans really helped ECW become what it became?
Yeah, I think at the beginning and for the majority of the ride, yes, the fans were a tremendous part of it. It became difficult to please the fans toward the end, I think, because they had seen so much and seen everything. I know Tommy Dreamer had said to me one time, he said, "There's nothing left for me to do here except take a bullet." And they had seen him do everything. Fell off the roof, going through 4 or 5 tables, just everything that you could do. We had pretty much done for everyone there. And I think if the company had kept growing, we may have not been there as often as we were. We were there like every 3 weeks, and you weren't. I don't think we were getting as much of a wanted crowd reaction. They were kind of starting to take over the show. So it kind of started to fire on us a little bit, but we're still, without the fans, we wouldn't have gotten to where we were, and we were still a team. The fans were part of the family.
No, and I mean, I was not able enough to watch ECW at its peak. I unfortunately I've had a chance to watch a lot of it on Peacock and when the WWE Network was around, and I've always said, because obviously, I've seen that you've done a few and do a few independent stuff, so you hopefully will get where I'm going with this. There are certain buildings when it comes to independent wrestling companies that the building becomes synonymous with the promotion.
Mm-hmm.
An example of that is there's a company down in New Jersey called Pro Wrestling Magic that run in a building called the Phil Sheridan Building, or more famously known as the Mecca. That's what
Right.
that's what it was deemed. But I actually said this to the promoter. I just had him on for an interview, and I said, I feel like the building became a huge part. And I think that's the same thing I can say for ECW, that building itself, not, and the fans included, but that building itself, I think almost became like the third. Like, you have the wrestling aspect of it, you have the fan aspect of it, but then I think you also have the building aspect.
Right. Oh yeah, it's the I'm trying to think of the best way. The wrestling, the performance, the reaction, and the atmosphere.
And the one thing I got a chance when I was down there, I don't know if you remember when this was around, there was a restaurant literally next door to the 2300 here called the Federal Donut Restaurant.
I didn't go to it, but I think somebody had said it was there, and I think it probably, when we were there, it was probably the Foreman Mills store. Because when we were there, Foreman Mills, which is a discount clothing store in the Philadelphia area, and then there was a dollar store. And if you remember, especially with the Public Enemy, the frying pans coming out of the crowd, and they were bought at the dollar store while the fans were standing in line. In fact, the guys would get there early and go next door and buy the pots and pans at the dollar store for $1 a piece. And when the fans would go in to buy them and there weren't any there, the guys are selling them inside for $3.
But that was ingenious, to say the least.
Yeah. Entrepreneurial and aspect of wrestling.
But obviously, there's a lot of big names. I know we mentioned Taz and Sabu. You also have the Dudleys. You mentioned Tommy Dreamer. This, obviously, because you were there, this may be tough to answer, but if you had to put together a Mount Rushmore of ECW, who would it be?
It's hard for me to answer just because, for a couple of reasons. One, I worked with all of them, no matter who they were. And I really would hate to offend anybody, but there are different ways to look at it. I mean, I look at it as, even if I were to answer it as the NWA, who would you put on the NWA? Well, what qualifications do they have to be a world champion? Do they have to have a certain amount of sellouts at the building? Do tag teams count? That there's a lot to put into it. Does the promoter count? Do they have to be in-ring talent? Because you could put, all right, Paul is the mastermind. Why shouldn't you be able to put the fans in there as as part of it too? So it's really difficult to say, 4 guys or whatever. But if I'm going to go strictly wrestlers, I have to go Terry Funk. In fact, you could probably put 4 Terry Funks up there and I'd be happy. But Terry, Tommy, because they were both heart and soul of the company. Rob Van Dam, because I feel that he kind of escalated us into a different level. He became a known entity amongst common wrestling fans when we weren't a common product. That's 3. Let's see. See, and then when you get to where I'm insulting somebody. I'd probably go Shane Douglas, because I think Shane Douglas got us to the next level when we were at almost at a point where we couldn't go any further. And that triple threat match that Funk, him, Funk, and Sabu, and then the press conference afterwards, and throwing the NWA belt down and declaring us, was it the century of extreme or whatever the exact words were that he used. So that might be it, but then I feel bad that we don't have any tag teams in there, because the Dudleys obviously were an amazing tag team. New Jack was an amazing talent. And you mentioned Taz and Sabu, and you just keep going on and on.
And I think that's what made ECW, and now obviously this is somebody who didn't get a chance to see ECW at its peak. But the fact that, you mentioned the name ECW, and you say to somebody, "Oh, who's your top 4?" And 9 times out of 10, it's like you always get the, because you have and there's even guys you didn't even mention, guys like Sandman, who could have been put on that list. You got guys like Bam Bam Bigelow, because I still remember one of them, a memory I have of watching ECW later on was Taz and Bam Bam Bigelow.
Yeah, and people forget about Bigelow and Rob Van Dam. That was a great match from Buffalo for the TV title.
Yeah, and I still remember seeing the images of the Dudleys throwing Spike Dudley halfway across the halfway across. But I also heard an interview where Bubba Ray Dudley said Spike would basically do anything.
He would. Before the Dudleys did it to him, Bam Bam did it to him. Throw him into the crowd and try to surf him. The first place we tried it, I was the referee for the match, so I remember this vividly, is that we were in Indianapolis at an armory, and Bam Bam takes him over his head and he throws him into the crowd, and the crowd parted like the Red Sea, and he bam right on the floor, and was slowly we turned and looked at each other and like he's dead. So that took a little, practice, a little time, we found the right place to do it was at the arena. They got what we were trying to do.
It became part of the show.
Yeah. The crowd was a part of the show. Absolutely. Like I said, the entertainment, the reaction of the crowd, and the atmosphere of that building.
So now, obviously, I talked about, Taz and Sabu. Is there a match, or it may just be Taz and Sabu, in your time with ECW that you look back at, you're like, I'm glad I was, I'm picturing myself that I was able to ref that match?
There are three that always come to mind.
Mm-hmm.
And there's actually more than three, and I'll explain that when I mention the third one. Taz and Sabu, absolutely, because it was the first the main event for the first paper, the targeted main event for the first pay-per-view. Because actually the main event was Terry Funk winning the ECW title. But the groundwork of the pay-per-view was Taz and Sabu. I just mentioned it earlier, the 60-minute time limit draw between Terry Funk, Sabu, and Shane Douglas. That was very important to the company because tape trading was important at the time. And that was the catalyst for ECW to get traded into the tape trading loop. Everybody heard about it. They wanted to see it. It went all over. It was traded all over the world. So I think those two are the two most important matches in the company's history. I mentioned Bigelow and Van Dam, just throw that in there as number 4. But number 3 for me is Malenko and Guerrero. And when I said it's not just one match, John and I flipped on and off doing that match. So they did it several times, and anytime it was a 5-star match. So you can't pick just one. You're just happy to be in the ring with the two of them.
And I saw, must have been, I think it was their last match that they had.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very big. One thing I always preach on our and on the podcast is storytelling. That's my biggest thing. Yeah. That's the biggest thing I will always say that ECW did very well at was storytelling. I mean, we talk about it a lot with Taz and Sabu.
Not the storyline, but storytelling in the match.
Yeah, the storytelling in the match. But you look at Malenko and Guerrero, and I think if I remember correctly, I think this was the match before Eddie Guerrero was going to WWE. I think one of them were about to go to WWE.
They were both going to WCW.
Oh, WCW, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, you want to talk about a match that literally I turned it on and I didn't even move for 30 seconds. My eyes were just mesmerized to the screen. I'm like, because these guys are doing moves and they're doing the most. And I think the other thing why I love that match so much is they weren't doing any of the high flying stuff like you saw, like the luchadors do. They told a story, but they told it in the most simplest of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't see that nowadays. You don't see, like, as the phrase has always been said, the art of storytelling. You don't see that
right
a lot now. And with those two, and folks, if you get the chance, I highly recommend going back and watching Malenko and Guerrero, because I'll tell you right now, even if you're not a diehard wrestling fan and you go to watch that, I would be shocked if you move anywhere, even to get a drink of water. I mean, you'll probably get a drink of water, but you're not going to take your eyes off the screen.
Yeah, no, those
That's the
were
nice part.
incredible matches. No matter where we were or who went over, um, it was great to be a part of it. And I think I might be wrong, but I think John and I were the only ones who did those matches in ECW. I don't think we ever gave those up to anyone else.
I don't blame you for that. But ECW closed down in I think 2000 or 2001.
2001, actually. Our
2000.
last show was January 13th, 2001.
Now, a lot of we did get some of the ECW guys who didn't move over to WWE. Were you offered a spot in WWE when
No,
everything?
no, I thought I would be because I was pretty tight with Paul. At least in my mind, I guess I was because I drove him quite a bit. I drove him behind the scene, a lot, or I shouldn't say behind the scene, but I drove him quite a bit, and we talked. We were friendly a whole bit. So I thought when I saw Paul pop up on TV, I'm like, wow, I'm sure I'll put a good word in for me. And waited and waited and waited. Nothing happened. So it was time to, move on, and not just in wrestling, but in the real world. I had to go back to being a citizen and finding a 9 to 5 job. I had a family, so I had to, feed the kids and keep a roof over our heads and pay for their college and all that kind of stuff. So I went back to the grind, and that was a difficult thing.
Oh, I can imagine. And you mentioned that you were friends with Paul Heyman. I meant to ask you this earlier, and it slipped my mind till now. Do you have any Paul Heyman stories that you can tell on here?
I really don't have any Paul stories that I can really tell. Um, Paul was pretty much. I don't want to say he's pretty much business most of the time, but nothing outrageous. Everybody expects here's the stories of drug abuse and alcohol abuse and all kinds of crazy stories with ECW, and I was definitely on the more timid side of goings on in ECW, and so when I drove people, it was because I had that reputation of being the adult in the room.
Can you get her? Do you want me to get her?
I'll get her. Sorry, letting the dog out.
You're good. You are good.
So go ahead, I can hear you.
But no. So then, when ECW closed its doors down, and you didn't get the opportunity that you thought you should have gotten to be in WWE, did you think you were going to ever go back to wrestling again?
Well, what I did was I did get involved. I had to find something for the creative juices, if you want to use that term. So, luckily, the Monster Factory, originally run by Larry Sharp and Buddy Rogers, back to Buddy again, was nearby. So I reached out and became a part of the Monster Factory. Helped with some of the training. Didn't do the training. Helped with some of the training, and helped promoted some of the matches that they had. So I found something to keep me busy, and that turned in the long run. Things split off into different directions, and people go their different ways. And we were running matches, events under the OTW banner, Old Time Wrestling, instead of a Monster Factory name. And so I went off with the OTW, with the trainer from the Monster Factory at the time, and we kept OTW going on our own. And we did that for a few years together, and then he moved back home to be near his family in Canada. So I was left with running everything, and I finally shut it down in right after the pandemic hit. And I just stopped running shows, and we had our own building for quite a while, which is actually now where Matt Tremont runs H2O Wrestling.
Oh, wow.
Same building. So we had found a couple of places where we could run monthly shows, or every other month, I think we were, and just finally got to be too much. I had had a heart attack, and I was just tired of being the adult in the room. So when I sold the ring, I sold it to the guys at ECWA, and they were coming up on their next Super 8 event. And they said, hey, would you consider reffing? And when I ran OTW, I stayed completely out of the picture. I was completely behind the scenes. Would come out at intermission and say, hey, thanks for coming out. We appreciate it. And next week we're going to have, wrestler A against wrestler B. Come on back. So I thought about it for a minute, and I was like, I don't know. I haven't done it, I haven't ref for 15 years. And they said, well, John works for us. John Finnegan works for us. And the first time you guys had been together since the last ECW pay-per-view. And I was like, okay, I'll do it. And so that's been, I guess, 3 years now. And I've been back reffing, doing some commentary for some people, seminars, even for a company in locally here in New Jersey, SPO Wrestling, which is run by Johnny Cashmere. I am now a manager.
No, I definitely want to get into that because I know they have another show coming up in a couple of weeks, I think.
Yeah, their next show is May the 19th.
And the big thing I know with that one is Sonny Kiss takes on the courageous Christina Marie. It was announced.
Who I'm managing. Christina Marie
I'll be honest.
Part of my team.
I get a chance to see Christina Marie at one of the companies that I have that this podcast has a good working relationship with, called Immortal Championship Wrestling.
Okay.
And she's currently their women's champion. And I've always said, when you look at, and I know I asked you the question before about what the Mount Rushmore for ECW, but when you look at independent wrestling for women in the Northeast, especially in like the New York, New Jersey area, more specifically, you would have to, without even batting an eyelash, have to put Christina Marie.
Yeah, she's very busy, and we're proud to have her as the first SPO wrestling champion, or as I say, the greatest SPO women's champion.
Yeah, I could see that, but so where can fans, you mentioned SPO, where can fans who are interested get tickets?
SPOwrestling.com is where you can get tickets for that.
That's a very simple way to put it. Jim, I greatly appreciate you hopping on with us tonight. It was a blast. One last question I got for you. If you had, and this is actually, it's two questions. I have a second part that just dawned on me. Looking at what you have accomplished from your stuff with ECW and what you're doing now, if you had the chance to turn around and talk to younger Jim, who was first becoming a wrestling fan, what would you tell him after everything that you've experienced in the wrestling world?
You'll probably enjoy the ride. You'll enjoy where you get to. I'm not disappointed that I never worked for the WWE. I'm not, or WCW, or any major super company. I'm really happy with the career that I had. The ECW fans are great. They still are, even though I was in the building the first time for WrestleCon weekend, and I hadn't been there in 15 years, and they were great to me. So yeah, enjoy the ride, kid.
And well, actually, you mentioned that you were in the building. Did you at least get a chance to go see the mural?
I did, and I signed it. Oh. I got to sign it.
I also signed it, and when I was there originally was, God, I think 2 years ago for Icons, like one of the Icons shows that Timothy Miller always runs. When I went back there WrestleMania weekend, and I went to go look at the mural because I was like, I'm going to Philly. I'm gonna be in the ECW building. Let me go find this. Let me go find the mural. And the first signature I found, I kid you not, was my signature from 2 years ago. But if you have and like I said, you've reffed a lot of big names. It's a laundry list of the names that you've been in the ring with. If you had the chance to ref, who would be your dream match to ref?
Does it strictly ECW people?
No, could be anybody.
Oh my God, I would referee the Midnight Express against the Rock and Roll Express any day. Oh my God, what a great match! Or I'd even if I can't have the Rock and Roll Express, give me the Fantastics. Oh,
another great tag team right there. But Jim, like I said, I am honored and very grateful that we had a chance to have you on. Definitely want to have you on again. Like I said, whenever you like to come on, the door's open for you. Where can the fans connect with you on social media, and what else do you have coming up that you like to plug?
Right there is the Twitter or X, whatever it is, at Jim Molineaux, JimMolineaux. You can, and there has my email address, so that way if you want to book me if you're a promoter wants to book me for events or seminars, signings for conventions, all that kind of good stuff, you can get a hold of me through that, probably the best way. Where am I going to be? Let's see. I'm off this weekend, which is nice. But ISPW, I work for a lot, Tommy Fierro. So check their schedule. I'm on pretty much everything he does. Let's see. Of course, SPOW or SPO Wrestling. Check them out. Assault Championship Wrestling, which is run by Jason Knight. They have an event coming up May the 18th, if that's the Saturday. Yeah. Okay. In Williamstown, New Jersey. That's going to be fun. A lot of old ECW guys gathering up there. Also, Tommy Fierro mentioned ISPW. He's also having a couple of conventions. He's doing an 80s convention, which will have matches attached to it in Morris Township, New Jersey. And then July, I always get the dates. I think it's 13th, 14th, and 15th.
Yeah, I think so.
Maybe 12th, 13th, whatever that weekend is in July. He has a big convention for 3 days down in Atlantic City. And I'm not sure everything going on every day, but I know Saturday he's gonna emphasize the NWO, and Sunday is going to be a big ECW day. And their match is Saturday at 6:00 for that, because the Hardys are in also. So I think a little birdie may have told me that Jeff Hardy's going to be doing a concert after the matches. So that's why they're starting at 6:00. So, and my schedule, like I said, those companies I work for pretty much all the time. And I usually put up on Twitter every week where I'm going to be.
Absolutely. And Jim, like I said, guys, go check out SPO Wrestling. Go check out ISPW, two phenomenal companies. But Jim, it was a blast having you on tonight. I definitely want to get you on again later on, especially to help promote SPO and ISPW as well. And like I said, if there's anything you ever like to promote, all you gotta do is hit me up, and I'll definitely bring you back on.
I appreciate it. Had a good time,
guys. For the ECW legend himself, Jim Molineaux, I'm John. It's been Around the Ropes, YouTube exclusive. Catch you guys next time.